Hey guys, tonight we time travel straight into the dusty, sun-baked heart of ancient Mesopotamia. The year? Somewhere around 1750 BCE. You stand ankle-deep in grit as the smell of roasted barley and animal dung wafts across a busy market square. Clay buildings cast long shadows in the fading amber light, and somewhere nearby, a man is yelling about copper. Not just any copper, bad copper, chunky, impure, flaky copper. He's furious, loud, and honestly, he's about to become famous in the most ancient and oddly bureaucratic way possible. You've stumbled into the setting of the first customer service complaint ever recorded. That's right. Even 4,000 years ago, humans were already mad about bad deals, and they wanted someone to fix it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and the local time in the comments. Let's see who else is winding down with a little ancient drama. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward. The ground crunches beneath your feet, dried reeds and broken pottery shards. The sky's going gold to purple overhead, and you hear the gentle coo of pigeons flapping home to roost in temple eaves. This isn't a fairy tale. It's Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, and tonight, the cradle of righteous indignation. People around you wear wool tunics, some with elegant fringe, others stained from labor. A boy drags a goat by a rope, muttering under his breath. A vendor hawks dried dates with all the excitement of a tired flight attendant. And just off to your left, beneath a faded awning, a man with eyebrows so furrowed they could shelter a small family is waving a half-loaded cart and cursing in Akkadian. You've just spotted Nanny, or well, the historical seed of him. Historians still argue whether his name was actually Nanny or simply a transcription mistake, but the complaint he filed? That part's undisputed. Before we meet him properly, though, you need to understand something. Writing didn't start with poetry, not with love letters, not even with heroic myths, nope. The first writing, way back in Sumer, was mainly to track stuff. Barley, sheep, beer rations, and yes, copper shipments. It was glorified accounting. The world's first scribes were like ancient Excel spreadsheets with better posture. They carved into wet clay with styluses, thin reeds sliced to a point. When it dried, the clay hardened into a permanent record. You couldn't just delete or rage smash it without someone noticing. If you wrote it, you meant it. One of the earliest uses of this technology, telling someone off. But before things get juicy, let's talk about the tools. You glance down at a low wooden stall where a young apprentice is rolling out a ball of clay. It's the size of a dinner roll, damp, warm from the sun. He's careful not to let it dry too fast, or it'll crack before he's done. He picks up a stylus and practices his wedges. Short strokes, angled lines, tiny triangles in neat rows. It's almost meditative, except he's not writing poetry. He's copying a list of grain owed to the temple. Riveting stuff. The cuneiform writing system, literally wedge-shaped, was so durable it survived thousands of years buried in sand and forgotten ruins. That means a lot of what we know about these people comes from messages they never meant to be famous. One quirky tidbit: some scribes practiced by writing dummy receipts, fake transactions for things like 1 unicorn or 10 jars of moonlight, just to keep it interesting. But back to the marketplace. It's loud. Donkeys bray, kids shout, and somewhere a pan flute is being played with questionable talent. You're here during the Old Babylonian period, which means Hammurabi's famous law code is freshly minted and already ignored in certain corners. This isn't just any city. It's likely Ur or Uruk, sprawling hubs of trade where ships on the Euphrates brought in goods from as far as the Indus Valley. Picture it. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cedar wood from Lebanon, gold from Egypt, and copper from the Persian Gulf. Or at least it should be copper. Sometimes it's just junk in a sack. You duck as a pair of clay jugs nearly collide above your head. Some poor porter is having a clumsy day. You follow him to a merchant's stall where a man is unwrapping a delivery. His face drops. The contents are dull, oxidized lumps, more rock than metal. You hear the hiss of displeasure. "This isn't what I paid for," he mutters. He could yell, he could sulk, or he could do something radical for his time. He could file a written complaint. It's hard to overstate how weird this would have been back then. Most disputes were settled with a good shouting match, maybe a slap, or if things got heated, a priestly mediator. But writing down a grievance, that took effort, materials, and a scribe who wasn't already busy tallying goat droppings. Yet here we are. The man, again possibly Nanny, is about to dictate something immortal. You watch as he strides into a small, shaded booth and grumbles to a middle-aged scribe lounging against a clay wall. The scribe rolls his eyes, picks up a tablet, and begins. Slowly, methodically, the world's first recorded customer complaint is etched into history. You won't read the full thing until later, but it begins something like this. Tell Ea Nasir, Nani sends the following message. And just like that, the wheels of ancient bureaucracy creak to life. You glance up at the city skyline, ziggurats rising like layer cakes against the deepening sky. The air is thick with history, and also, weirdly, the scent of fermented fish. You're standing at the edge of a revolution, not in swords or kings, but in something far more human. The right to demand better service. You move deeper into the city of Ur, the sky now a dusky violet. Lanterns flicker to life, simple oil flames inside clay saucers, casting jittery shadows on the mud brick walls. The air is still warm, but there's a welcome breeze weaving through narrow alleys where cats slink like whispers, and the scent of sheep lingers like a forgotten dinner. Ur isn't just some backwater. It's one of the crown jewels of Sumer, a city-state bustling with ambition, gossip, and all the petty squabbles of urban life. You pass two men loudly arguing over the quality of date wine, while a teenager in a linen tunic pretends not to listen, but is clearly filing away details for later gossip. The streets are alive with trade. Merchants shout their deals in overlapping melodies. 1 mina of barley, 2 shekels of incense, fresh goat milk, still warm. You dodge a donkey cart, then hop aside as a slippery fish flops from a basket onto your sandal. Welcome to the economic chaos where Nani and Ea Nasir did business, and possibly ruined each other's reputations forever. You finally reach the copper quarter. Here, the smell of metal clings to your nostrils, earthy, a bit acrid. Workers hammer at ingots, some glowing orange from the smelting kilns. Sparks fly in lazy arcs, and the rhythmic clang of metal on metal creates a background percussion to this bustling scene. In the middle of it all stands a dusty clay warehouse with a faded symbol etched over the doorway, Ea Nasir's trading house. From what we know, Ea Nasir was a copper dealer, a businessman who imported goods from places like Dilmun, a land that may correspond to modern-day Bahrain. The guy had serious connections. He could get your copper, your tin, your dreams of early industrial prowess. Unfortunately, he also had the worst Yelp rating in recorded history. You walk past his storeroom and peek inside. Shelves of rough-hewn copper chunks line the walls. Some look solid. Others, not so much. There's one particularly disappointing pile that resembles crusty bread loaves with all the quality of a melted paperweight. Here's where the gears start turning in your sleepy brain. This man, Ea Nasir, made a habit of selling low-quality metal to high-expectation customers. It wasn't just Nanny who complained. Archaeologists have found multiple tablets lodged in what appears to be Ea Nasir's home, each one voicing some kind of grievance. Basically, the guy was a walking PR disaster. You duck under a hanging bundle of reeds and eavesdrop on a heated negotiation happening between another merchant and a local buyer. The conversation is half hushed, half snarky. The customer is clearly inspecting a chunk of copper, holding it up to the oil lamp's glow, frowning hard. "You call this refined?" he grumbles. "I've seen cleaner ore in temple drainage." The seller's smile twitches. "A minor imperfection," he says, in a tone that implies this is your problem now. It hits you. This isn't just a market. It's the world's first customer service gauntlet. And no one's giving you a refund unless you've got serious evidence, a sharp tongue, or a friend in the priesthood. Mainstream history confirms that trade in Mesopotamia was a highly formalized affair. There were contracts, weight standards, and middlemen. But there was also plenty of room for trickery, overpromising, and old-school scams. And here's the kicker. If someone cheated you and your word didn't carry weight, you were toast. That's what made writing such a power move. A complaint written into clay wasn't just a hissy fit. It was a legal document. It could be read aloud in temple courts, copied by scribes, even preserved as a warning to future clients. And that's what Nanny was aiming for. As you walk the copper quarter, you start to notice little signs that this wasn't an isolated issue. A trader quietly scratches at the side of a crate with his stylus, marking a shipment checked. Another mutters something about never trusting shipments from Dilmun again. You pass a group of children pretending to be scribes and merchants. One stamps his sandal into a patch of mud and shouts, "This copper is rubbish." Everyone laughs, until a woman leans out her window and tells them to pipe down before they wake the barley god. Now, here's a quirky fringe theory some scholars toss around. What if the whole Nanny tablet was a kind of business theater? Like not just a complaint, but a performance of legitimacy? Some argue that merchants might have dramatized their grievances to gain respect or sway public opinion, almost like early branding wars. Imagine crafting a clay diss track to show you were serious about quality. Historians still argue whether the complaint was meant for legal escalation or just public shaming. But either way, it worked. We're still talking about it 4,000 years later. You finally reach a quiet courtyard and settle near a small garden. Fig trees, cracked urns, the faint buzz of insects. An older woman sells honey cakes from a cloth bundle on her lap. She offers you one wordlessly. You bite in. Sweet. Crumbly. The taste instantly reminds you how rarely things go wrong when no one is trying to upsell you smelted disappointment. She points toward a faded carving above a side door. It's a symbol for trade, but scratched above it in faint stylus marks is a cuneiform wedge cluster that translates roughly to, "Do not trust Ea Nasir." A warning, or maybe a meme. You'll never know. Evening drapes itself more fully across the city, and the lamps flicker brighter. You stretch your legs and glance toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, ships are sailing up the Euphrates carrying copper cargo. You wonder if they're any better. You wonder if another Nanny is waiting to blow a gasket over oxidized scrap. Odds are, probably. You're back in the marketplace before the next sunrise. Roosters are crowing like they invented alarm clocks, and the city of Ur is yawning itself awake. You squint through the dusty light as the copper merchants prepare their stalls for another long day of wheeling, dealing, and in one particular case, stealing your trust in humanity. Today's all about copper. The weighty reddish metal gleams under the sun, stacked in hunks that look like someone forgot to finish sculpting a sword. And while most traders squint and tap their copper to test its purity, one man stares at it like it's a personal insult. That man is Nanny. You've seen him already. Furrowed brow, clenched jaw, sandals flapping like angry punctuation marks. Here's what we know. Nanny bought copper from Ea Nasir. He paid good money, probably silver or grain, depending on the trade agreement. But what he got? An absolute embarrassment. Rocks with a sprinkle of copper, like trying to buy a gold ring and getting a crusty bottle cap spray-painted yellow. And he wasn't just mad about the product. No. He was mad about the whole experience. Ea Nasir wasn't there when the copper arrived. The delivery was late. The messenger got treated like a mosquito in a soup kitchen. Honestly, if you wrote this down today, it'd read like, "Waited 3 weeks for garbage product. Manager ghosted me. Do not recommend." You follow Nanny as he paces outside the scribal booth. He's holding a small, wrapped bundle, likely a sample of the offending copper, and muttering like a man composing a speech in his head. He finally steps inside. The scribe, slouched in a corner with clay stains on his fingers and the patience of someone who's copied the same legal formula 400 times, sits up. Nanny slams the bundle on the table. The scribe unwraps it and snorts. This copper is worse than he expected. He picks up his stylus. The tablet is smoothed and wet, a cool patch of possibility. Then Nanny begins to dictate. Tell Ea Nasir. Nani sends the following message. You hold your breath. This isn't just a complaint. It's a literary dagger. Nanny doesn't just accuse. He catalogs. He lists every insult, every failure, every moment of humiliation in painful, punchy wedges of cuneiform. When you came, you said to me as follows, I will give Gimel Sin good quality copper ingots. You left, but the copper you delivered was not good. The scribe pauses. He squints. Nanny is just getting warmed up. You treated my messenger with contempt, and you sent him back empty-handed through enemy territory. Poof. That's like leaving your Uber Eats driver in a war zone and refusing to tip. Here's your mainstream fact of the night. This very tablet, real, physical, discovered in the ruins of Ur, still survives in the British Museum. And its tone? It reads like the ancient equivalent of a 1-star review delivered by someone who's been stewing for weeks. You peek over the scribe's shoulder. The cuneiform is precise but angry. Each wedge slams into the clay like punctuation. Nanny doesn't just want a refund. He wants justice. He wants dignity. He wants Ea Nasir to feel the sting of 1,000 wedges pressed firmly into his pride. But let's zoom out a bit. Copper in ancient Mesopotamia was essential, not just for pretty trinkets, but for tools, weapons, and religious offerings. It was rare, expensive, and usually imported from places like Oman and Bahrain. The trip? Long, dangerous, and prone to piracy, bad weather, and the occasional grumpy customs official with a spear. So when Nanny says he got bad copper, it's not just a mild inconvenience. He likely missed a business opportunity, lost face among peers, and maybe even angered a temple administrator expecting shiny goods for Marduk's birthday bash. There's a fringe theory floating among scholars that Ea Nasir may have intentionally dumped the bad batch, hoping his client wouldn't notice, or couldn't do anything about it. After all, power in Mesopotamia wasn't evenly distributed. If you were rich, literate, and temple-connected, you could crush someone with a single clay note. If you weren't, well, you prayed the gods liked you enough to make your delivery arrive intact. Historians still argue whether this particular tablet was actually sent or just left at the scribe's office as a public record, a kind of permanent scarlet letter for bad business. Either way, it's clear Nanny knew what he was doing. You glance again at the tablet in progress. The scribe has to pause and get a new chunk of clay. This is becoming voluminous. Nanny is now referencing past shipments, slights, and even possibly previous betrayals. This isn't just a customer complaint. It's a grudge wearing a business hat. Suddenly, you hear a quiet snort from the corner. A teenage apprentice is listening in, eyes wide, clearly holding in laughter. Nanny shoots him a glare. The kid mimics scribbling in the air. "Tell Ea Nasir, your copper stinks and so do you." Okay, maybe not verbatim, but the tone is accurate. By now, the scribe has completed the tablet. It's a rectangular slab, about the size of a thick smartphone but 10 times heavier. The letters are clean, but sharp. It will dry in the sun, harden into permanence, and eventually be delivered, or maybe thrown dramatically into Ea Nasir's courtyard, like the world's angriest paperweight. You step outside. The sky is growing warmer, brighter. Merchants open their shutters, and the smell of hot lentils and flatbread drifts through the city. Somewhere in a side alley, someone's singing a hymn to Ishtar that sounds suspiciously off-key. You think back to the tablet's opening line. "Tell Ea Nasir." That phrase hits different now. It's not a whisper. It's a declaration. A clay punch in the face. A 4,000-year-old mood. You smirk. Nanny didn't just want better copper. He wanted to make sure no one else got duped again. You follow the trail of gossip as it curls through the back streets of Ur like incense smoke in a temple. Word travels fast here. Faster than copper caravans, faster than river barges. And today's hot news? Nanny's tablet has been spotted, freshly scribed, still damp. A clay scorcher, aimed directly at one Ea Nasir, dealer of copper, and now, drama. You stop by a baker's stall where 2 older men are hunched over breakfast, like pigeons over breadcrumbs. One chews slowly, lips smacking, while the other waves his flatbread for emphasis. "I heard he used temple weights," the second man hisses. "Fake ones." "Ea Nasir? Who else?" The first shrugs. "Man's a snake in sandals." There's no official newsletter in Ur. But who needs one when your neighbors have nothing better to do than narrate your every business transaction like it's a royal scandal? You trail the whispers all the way to the temple square. Yes, that temple. Ziggurat rising like a stairway to the gods, its mud brick body glowing gold in the early sun. Priests are already out front, some in spotless robes, some swatting flies with papyrus fans. This is where reputations are made, and unmade. See, temples in ancient Mesopotamia weren't just about prayer and sacrifice. They were banks, archives, record keepers. If a deal went south, if you needed arbitration, or even if you just wanted your message to hit harder, you brought it here. So imagine Ea Nasir waking up to the news that Nani's complaint has made it into temple territory. That's not a note between friends. That's an ancient version of getting roasted on the city's bulletin board. You edge closer to a cluster of scribes, young men with ink-stained fingers and the kind of hollow-eyed focus usually reserved for chess tournaments and tax season. One of them is reading Nanny's tablet aloud. It sounds even more brutal out in the open. "You have treated me with contempt," the scribe intones. "Though I have sent as messengers gentlemen like ourselves, You can almost hear the dramatic pause. The people nearby are nodding, murmuring. One woman clutches her necklace like she's just heard blasphemy. Another rolls her eyes and mutters, "Should have known better." The Dillman shipments are cursed. Here's your mainstream history snack. Trade in Mesopotamia was vast, risky, and obsessively documented. Merchants often relied on intermediaries, messengers, and letters written in cuneiform. The risk of fraud was real, but so was the bureaucracy. That's why records like Nanny's mattered. If the temple scribes copied it, it became precedent. In fact, some historians believe this whole system of recorded business and complaints laid the groundwork for modern commercial law. That's right. You might owe your right to refund a broken phone to one very angry Mesopotamian. But it wasn't just about rules. It was about status. And in public shame was like sunburn. It lingered. You make your way toward the inner courtyard, where the high priest sits in judgment over disputes. He's not here today, but his apprentices, dressed in neat linen, with styluses tucked into their belts like scholars' swords, are lounging on low benches, observing. A younger one whispers, "This nanny's got guts. You don't just challenge Eonasir like that." The older apprentice nods. Or you do, if you've already been burned, and you don't care who hears the scream. A quirky tidbit? There's a fringe theory that Nanny's complaint was more than personal. It may have been a power move. Some scholars suggest he belonged to a rival trading faction, and this complaint was less about copper and more about carving up Eonasir's market share. Business warfare, but in clay. Historians still argue whether the complaint was meant to resolve a trade dispute or to publicly wreck Eonasir's credibility. After all, writing in Mesopotamia wasn't just for recording, it was a tool. It could create truth, destroy it, or bend it toward whoever had the sharpest stylus. You walk past a carved relief on the temple wall, merchants unloading goods before a god, hands raised in supplication. The inscription below reads, "Trade in honor, and the gods will bless your grain." You bet Eonasir's grain isn't looking so great right now. Suddenly, there's a flurry of motion at the gate. A courier runs in, panting, hair askew. He clutches a wrapped bundle under one arm and practically skids to a halt at the base of the ziggurat. He drops to one knee and unfurls the package, a clay tablet of his own. Not Nanny's. This one's from Eonasir. Oh boy. You inch closer as another scribe picks it up, eyes scanning rapidly. His brows rise. To Nanny, the new tablet begins. The copper was examined in Dillman. The quality was as agreed. I cannot control the journey. A weak defense. Blame the delivery system? Come on, Eonasir. At least try. But here's what's fascinating. This reply, while not as famous, represents something massive. A dialogue. Possibly the first documented customer service exchange in human history. One tablet full of fire, another full of deflection, and both now exist in public, preserved in stone, like a passive-aggressive email thread in eternal caps lock. You lean back against the temple wall, taking it all in. Nanny's words, Eonasir's reply, the echo chamber of turning every merchant into a courtroom spectator. This wasn't just a fight over copper. This was the birth of accountability. And somewhere out there, Eonasir is probably stewing in his courtyard, tablet in hand, wondering where it all went wrong. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the breeze pass over your face. In the distance, you hear a flute begin to play, a soft, wandering tune, almost sarcastically calm in a city of simmering drama. You leave the temple square behind, just as the breeze shifts. carrying the scent of something charred. Probably last night's lentils being reheated with a touch too much enthusiasm. Your sandals scrape the baked road as you wander deeper into the merchant district. And here, in the quiet alleys tucked between noisy stalls and boiling dye vats, you begin to understand the larger problem behind that infamous complaint tablet, the system that created it. Because see, Nanny's complaint isn't just a solo rant. It's a flare shot into the sky. And with its bustling bazaars, clinking waits, and record-keeping scribes, is one giant tinderbox of reputational fire hazards. You pause at a low-walled courtyard, where 3 young scribes are hunched over practice tablets. One is drawing a rather unflattering caricature of what looks suspiciously like Ea Nasir with donkey ears. Another is copying legal phrases like a student prepping for midterms. This day I swear by Enlil. Let no man dispute this record. The buyer shall inspect the goods. You raise an eyebrow. That last one hits different now. Because here's your mainstream historical fact for tonight. Mesopotamia had written contracts. Legit, formal, signed and baked documents that laid out who owed what, when, and how. Business wasn't just a handshake. It was a clay shake. The seller handed over a tablet. The buyer examined it. If terms were broken, boom. Temple mediation, scribal complaint, or if things got really nasty, a hex. You keep walking, your feet carrying you toward the canal. Trade boats rock gently along the water's edge, their cargo tarped against dust and sun. You squint at their markings, stylized fish, symbols for copper and dates, a divine eye here and there. Shipping logos, Mesopotamian style, and that's where you find a half-circle of boatmen arguing under a canopy. One's waving a fistful of frayed rope, another is jabbing at a wooden crate with a stick. Apparently, a shipment from Dilmun arrived 2 days late and half-crushed. The mood? Testy. You call that packing? One growls. You should see what I brought back from Megan, says another. At least this didn't have beetles crawling out of it. Someone chuckles, but not for long, because reputations here matter. A bad shipment isn't just a temporary loss. It's a stain. A warning. You settle into the edge of the group, and one older merchant turns to you with a weather-worn grin. You hear about Ea Nasir? He asks. You nod. He laughs, low and tired. Should have stuck to barley. You can't fake barley. Maybe not. But copper? Copper's tricky. It can be bright and gleaming on the surface, and riddled with slag beneath. That's the real problem. Mesopotamian trade, glorious and expansive as it was, ran on trust, and trust had to be verified. The tools of the trade weren't just scales and barges, but scribes and clay and curses whispered into corners. Here's a fringe detail you won't find in most textbooks. Some merchants carried tiny clay amulets, inscribed with protective charms against fraud. Think of it as an ancient equivalent of a legal insurance policy, with divine backup. If your deal went south, you weren't just angry. You were armed. You stopped by a stall selling weights and measures. The merchant proudly displays a set of black stones carved to represent the mina, the shekel, the talent. He catches your glance and winks. Certified by temple, he says. Not like some people. You don't need to ask who he means. It's this pervasive culture of checks, balances, and bureaucratic bickering that makes the nanny tablet so special. Because while other complaints may have been whispered or smoothed over with a jug of date beer, this one was carved, baked, preserved. Historians still argue whether Nanny truly expected satisfaction, or if the complaint was crafted simply to document his suffering for the record. Either way, he knew the rules. He followed the ritual: sample the copper, send the messenger, write the complaint. In doing so, he built a blueprint. Because in a way, Nanny's tablet wasn't just about copper. It was about creating a system in which people could complain. It was about normalizing the idea that even a common merchant could say, "This is not okay," and put it in writing. You move again, ducking beneath a hanging curtain into a quieter courtyard, this one ringed with workshops. Here, young scribes are practicing the art of tablet making, rolling clay, smoothing it with water, drying it in the sun. One student squints at his tablet and mutters, "How do you spell fraud in Sumerian?" Another replies, deadpan, "Just write Ea Nasir." Laughter follows, gentle and sleepy, the kind you hear when the day's work is done but not quite finished. You crouch beside them, watching the styluses move. The process is meditative, deliberate. Left to right, top to bottom, tiny wedges forming ideas, accusations, memories. A single tablet can hold a promise or a warning. You wonder if Ea Nasir, wherever he is, ever thought his name would survive this long. Not as a nobleman, not as a priest, but as that guy. The one who sold junk copper and got immortalized for it. You watch the sun begin to fall, casting long golden shadows across the brick paths. The city hums quietly now. Business will resume tomorrow. New deals, new gambles. But Nanny's tablet? That will remain. And so will the question it poses. When the system fails you, what do? You write it down. You don't realize how long you've been meandering until the sky starts tinting with lavender and the smell of roasting onions floats in from the kitchens. The streets are thinning now, just a few stragglers bartering at twilight, their voices lower, more cautious. Perfect time to slip into a quieter part of Ur, where drama still simmers, but the volume's turned down. You wind your way toward the scribe quarter, past stone benches and lotus-shaped oil lamps being lit one by one. This isn't the rowdy merchant district. Here, things are slower. Clay is everywhere, stacked, drying, etched, sometimes broken and discarded like forgotten drafts of a novel. If the market was where deals were born, this is where their ghosts live. You pause near a modest but tidy workshop. Its owner, an elderly scribe with hands like dry tree roots, is hunched over a shelf of tablets, muttering. "Here's the receipt for barley," he says to himself. "Here's the one where I had to remind that fool Lugal he already paid his temple taxes." You clear your throat. He looks up, startled, then squints like he's measuring your soul. "Come to complain?" he asks. You smile. "Not exactly, just curious," he snorts. "Aren't we all?" He gestures you inside, where rows of cubbyholes are stuffed with clay records, legal contracts, marriage agreements, tax rolls, and yes, complaints. So many complaints. This is the true heart of Mesopotamian bureaucracy. Not the dramatic ziggurats, not the boatmen arguing over who smashed whose amphora. This, rows and rows of baked clay, each etched with someone's need to be remembered, or better yet, vindicated. Your host picks up a worn tablet and runs his thumb along the indentations. "This one," he says, "is a husband promising to return his wife's goat after the harvest. Never did. She came back a year later with a stylus and an attitude." You try not to laugh. The scribe chuckles anyway. "People think we only write for kings and gods, but the truth is, we write for grudges." Here's your mainstream historical moment. The scribal class in Mesopotamia was one of the most respected and feared professions. These weren't just literate folks. They were document wielders, memory makers. They could elevate a deal or bury a scam, and they knew it. You sit beside a low table where an apprentice is practicing common complaint formats. One reads, "On the day of Shamash, I delivered the cargo to the agreed location. It was received with scorn. The buyer refused full payment. I demand judgment." Sounds formal, but you can feel the salt behind those words. Another example is halfway between a log and a poem. 3 donkeys lost in the crossing. 4 measures of grain wet with river sludge. I was promised safe passage. I got curses instead. There's poetry in that frustration. And now, your quirky tidbit of the night. Some scribes had favorite rage phrases they reused across complaints, like early meme formats. One particularly spicy scribe was known for ending tablets with, "May Enlil weigh your deeds as dung on a scale." Harsh, petty, effective. You watch as the apprentice gently places his finished practice tablet in the sun to dry. The clay still smells earthy and warm, like something half-born. It's easy to forget, in our era of refunds and reviews, that the idea of being heard wasn't always a given. Nani didn't just record his outrage, he exercised a kind of power, a belief that the scribes, the temple, the system itself would uphold some form of justice. Historians still argue whether complaints like Nani's were legally binding or just public shame tactics. Some think they were performative, meant more to pressure than to prosecute. Others argue they were essentially affidavits, with real legal weight behind them, depending on how much clout the scribe had, and whose God backed your side. Your host gestures toward a darkened corner where a few cracked tablets lie in a shallow bowl. Discards, errors, unwanted memories. "Not all complaints get heard," he murmurs. "Not all records get saved." And there it is again, that flicker of mortality. Clay lasts, people don't. But the right combination of words, pressed into the right hands, that might echo across millennia. You ask about Nani's tablet. The scribe smirks. "Ah, the copper fiasco. We've all copied it at some point. It's a favorite in scribal schools. Clear prose, great pacing, excellent dramatic irony." He winks. A classic. You lean back, letting the scent of drying clay and lamp oil drift over you. All around, apprentices scratch and press, carve and smooth. Some are muttering to themselves, practicing aloud. One is humming a lullaby in between phrases. It sounds like wind over a desert ridge. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine the first time that tablet was read aloud. The pause before the words. "What do you take me for, that you treat me with such contempt?" A hush, a knowing glance, a sharp intake of breath. We remember kings and battles, sure, but this is the hum of real life. Shipping delays, unfair deals, hurt feelings, the daily struggle to be taken seriously. And through it all, someone with a stylus, quietly recording everything in neat, precise strokes. As night presses closer, your host begins to snuff the lamps. He offers you a small clay disc, etched with the symbol for record on one side and listen on the other. "A charm," he says, "for remembering." You pocket it gently. Out in the cool night air, you look up at the stars. Those same stars Nani saw as he waited for his copper to arrive. He probably didn't know he was about to change history. He was just mad. And he had a stylus. And sometimes, that's enough. The night air in thickens with spice smoke and that faintly sour scent of canal water. Somewhere a lullaby floats from an open window, slow and uneven, like a reed flute drifting on the wind. But you're not ready to sleep yet. Not when the next part of this tale is waiting in a house half lit and cluttered with cargo. You follow a narrow alley lined with storage pits and reed-wrapped baskets until you reach the threshold of a home that once belonged to a copper merchant. Not that copper merchant. Nasir's house is further down, and you'll get there. But this place belonged to one of his rivals, and it still holds the echo of the business practices that defined a civilization. You step inside, and the scent of old metal fills your nose. The walls are scored with lists, quantities of goods, trader names, delivery routes. Some have been scratched out, updated, re-signed. This is where Nani and others like him would come to negotiate, argue, and sometimes, let's be honest, lie a little. Because here's tonight's mainstream fact. The Mesopotamians used standardized weights and trade protocols across vast distances. Whether you were trading in Ur, Lagash, or all the way down to Dilmun or Magan, you had to agree on measures. Think of it as the first version of international trade regulations. Copper from Oman must weigh the correct shekels. Dates from Babylon, same story. But here's the rub. Standardization only works if everyone plays fair, and everyone did not. You glance over a cracked clay receipt nailed to a wooden beam. The writing's rushed, sloppy, almost desperate. You make out the word substitute and something like inferior ingots. There it is. The real drama of Mesopotamian commerce. Fake goods, swaps, shady deals done in the name of efficiency or greed. You crouch near a crate that was once sealed with a bitumen stamp. The stamp's still there, but it's smeared. Deliberately? Who knows? Maybe someone in the chain got nervous. Maybe Nasir wasn't the only one cutting corners. Maybe the problem was systemic. Because that's the crux of Nani's fury. Not just that his copper was trash, but that he knew Nasir had gotten away with it before. He says so in the tablet. Every time I sent a messenger, they came back empty-handed or insulted. You can hear the exhausted disbelief in his words. And now, your offbeat tidbit. Some Mesopotamian merchants hired curse specialists to bless their shipments or curse their competitors. These weren't priests exactly, more like freelance divine contractors. Their rituals might involve writing the competitor's name on a piece of clay and burying it upside down beneath a temple wall. Passive-aggressive, but highly effective if you believe the gods are watching. One tablet found near Ur includes a poetic plea to Enki. May the dishonest merchant find scorpions in his storehouse and his barley sour before it ferments. So yeah, customer satisfaction was taken very seriously. You rise and run your fingers along a shelf of copper tools, dull now with age. They're smaller than you expected. Light chisels, delicate tongs, fragments of mirror-polished blades. Not made for war. These were tools of craft, of building, of trade. It hits you that this was the lifeblood of the city. Not kings, not gods, but copper and barley and oil all logged in clay. Every transaction recorded. Every misstep potentially immortal. Historians still argue whether Nasir's reputation was actually that bad, or if he just had the bad luck of being the one merchant whose client knew how to write an unforgettable takedown. Some scholars think his family may have carried on trading for years after. Others think the complaint became so notorious that his house lost status and became a cautionary tale. Either way, you feel it, the power of permanence. Clay doesn't care about excuses. You step back out into the street, which glows now under the soft oil lamps mounted at each corner. The city seems quieter, like it's listening. You pass by a mural painted in fading red pigment. Two merchants exchanging bundles. One holds out a stylized ingot, while the other holds up a scale. It's not an exact likeness, but suddenly you realize this could be a dramatized version of the infamous deal. A bit of propaganda, maybe. A public reminder. Trade fairly, or else you'll end up like him. A group of children runs by laughing, trailing a dog that's somehow more scar than fur. One shouts over his shoulder, "You sell like Ea Nasir!" And the others shriek with delight. You can't help but smile. The insults clearly survived. But here's a deeper truth. Nanny's tablet didn't just document a bad business deal. It set a tone. It carved a boundary in clay that said, "This far, no further." It made it possible to imagine a system where complaints mattered, where records couldn't be denied or burned or rewritten without consequence. And more than that, it made it clear that even without swords or crowns, words could win. Reputation could be preserved or shattered, one careful wedge at a time. You continue toward the residential quarter, where the homes are tighter together and families gather on rooftops to share food and gossip. Someone's playing a simple harp. Another person recites a poem too softly for you to catch, but the cadence is soothing, rhythmic, almost like a contract itself. You sit on a low wall, tired but wired, watching the stars emerge above the ziggurat in the distance. For a moment, you wonder if Nani ever found satisfaction, if Ea Nasir ever responded, if the temple ever intervened. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. But the complaint was written, the system was tested, and the idea that your voice could survive was born. You don't remember standing up exactly. One moment you're on the wall watching stars drip into the horizon. The next, your feet are moving. Down alleys still warm from the day, past snoring goats and oil lamps casting their last flickers. There's something drawing you now, something ancient and a little smug. You're heading for the house of Ea Nasir, not the museum version, not a neat glass display with a label, but the real thing, where stone meets mud brick and bad decisions echo through the walls. You slow as you reach it. It's a modest home, honestly, not the palace of a copper tycoon, but it's got that distinct vibe of someone who once thought they were more important than they were. The gate is low and square. The front room, probably used for trade meetings, still has deep grooves where heavy crates were dragged across the floor. You step inside, half expecting to feel some great cosmic justice hanging in the air. But instead, you just find dust, old copper fragments, a ledger tablet, half broken, half legible, the ancient equivalent of a half-deleted email. And yet, you're here, and you feel it, that faint hum of drama once lived, regret once baked into clay. So let's zoom in for a second. What actually happened between Nani and Ea Nasir? Mainstream history fact. Ea Nasir was a copper merchant who operated out of Ur around 1750 BCE. He sourced his metal from regions like Magan, modern-day Oman, and had a reputation, or at least a record, for less than perfect quality control. Nani, who likely lived in or near Ur, sent a representative to collect a shipment and return with it. What came back? Shoddy copper and insults. Lots of them. How do we know? Because Nani's response still exists. His clay tablet, now lovingly housed in the British Museum, is the first recorded customer service complaint in history. And you can hear the exhaustion in every word. He writes that he's been wronged multiple times, that Ea Nasir has been rude to his representatives, that the copper was substandard and the delivery was late. At one point, he demands the return of his own messenger's money bag. A petty detail, yes, but it says everything. Even the pouch didn't make it back. Now here's the quirky twist of the night. The tablet wasn't even meant for us. It was addressed directly to Ea Nasir. Nani didn't write it for an audience. He wrote it to vent, to scold, to draw a line in cuneiform. But somewhere along the line, the tablet ended up not being destroyed. Someone stored it, maybe ignored it, maybe rolled their eyes at it. And that act of neglect became a miracle of preservation. You run your fingers along the walls of Nasir's house, brushing flakes of clay off the crumbling shelf where copper once gleamed. There's no copper now, no guards, no messengers, just silence and a lingering scent of mineral dust. Historians still argue whether this tablet was one of many similar ones. Some believe Nani might have written several complaints, each more annoyed than the last. Others think this was the only formal one, meant to be shown in the temple or before elders if things escalated. A Mesopotamian cease and desist. And then there's the eternal question. Did it work? We'll probably never know. But maybe that's not the point. You glance down and notice a pile of scrap tablets, broken bits and shards, all with partial inscriptions. They read like ancient drama fragments. Withheld my barley, did not arrive as agreed, speaks falsely before the gods. It's not just Nani. There were others. This was a known pattern. Nasir's reputation wasn't just bad luck. It was earned slowly, transaction by transaction. And yet, he kept trading. That's the part that makes your brain itch, because it means his behavior didn't get him canceled. Not immediately. In a world where every transaction could be documented, reputation was both everything and still not enough. You wonder what it felt like to be him, standing here as another angry client pounded on his door. Did he scoff? Did he scribble excuses on the back of a clay scrap? Did he ever feel guilt? Or did he think like so many others? They'll come back. They always do. You step through a rear corridor into what must have been his storehouse. The shelves are long gone, but you can see the soot marks from oil lamps, the worn spots on the floor where scales were set down and adjusted again and again. And sitting there in the corner is an old scale beam, rusted to uselessness, but unmistakably present. You pick it up. It's heavier than you expect. One pan still dangles by a single thread of bronze wire, as if daring you to weigh something intangible, like pride, like justice, like regret. You place it back down gently. Outside, the wind picks up, a dry breeze. It rattles through the narrow passage like a whispered warning. Do better. So here's what you know now. Nani didn't just write a complaint. He captured a moment of clarity, one where accountability was demanded, and maybe, just maybe, recorded justice began to mean something. You leave the house of Nasir behind, walking slower now. The stars are high, the city's mostly asleep, but your mind is buzzing with thoughts older than history class. Clay can lie dormant for millennia, but give it a name, give it a grievance, and it becomes immortal. And somewhere out there, buried under rubble or tucked into a museum drawer, is probably another complaint tablet. One we haven't found yet. One that will crack open a new story, a new scolding, a new echo from the ancient world that reminds us. People have always been petty, and people have always cared. You wake again, not from sleep, but from that dreamy kind of wandering your mind slips into when history starts to feel too real. The smell of old copper still clings to your fingertips, and your feet ache in a way that tells you you've been pacing through more than just alleys. You've been walking through 4,000 years of grudges. But tonight, you're not done, not even close. You pass the empty shell of Nasir's home, leaving behind the lingering echoes of petty insults and bargain bin copper. Your path now curves toward the temple district, wide roads paved with dark stone and edged with offerings left in cracked bowls. Grain, dried dates, a bit of old honey smeared into the corner like a child forgot it mid-prayer. This is where complaints like nannies came to be taken seriously, sometimes. Because here's your historical anchor for this leg of the night. In Mesopotamian society, temples weren't just for worship. They were economic powerhouses. They stored grain, issued loans, tracked labor, and mediated disputes. If you had a beef with someone powerful or too slippery to catch in their own home, this was where you went. And yes, sometimes it worked. You slide into the shadow of a ziggurat, its layered bricks glowing faintly under moonlight. Up close, the structure feels alive, like it's breathing secrets through its mortar. You imagine Nani standing here, tablet in hand, heart pounding, maybe with a junior scribe behind him, maybe with his fists clenched in frustration. What did he expect? A public trial? Restitution? A chance to watch Ea-Nasir sweat under a priest's glare? Historians still argue whether temples actively enforced commercial fairness or just played the role of dignified suggestion makers. Some tablets show contracts overseen by temple officials. Others read more like polite nudges. Maybe you shouldn't steal your neighbor's donkey again. So, Nani's choice to inscribe his fury in cuneiform may have been part legal maneuver, part public shaming campaign, a passive-aggressive Yelp review in clay, but with real consequences if it made its way into the temple's archive. You wander through the outer sanctum. No one's here, but you can feel the residue of judgment. This is where decisions were made. Some written, some whispered. Now for your fringe fact. Some Mesopotamian temples had what we'd now call complaint boxes, literally. A small stone or clay vessel where people could drop anonymous tablets voicing their frustrations against neighbors, merchants, even priests. The tablets would be collected and reviewed, and while many were likely ignored, a few survive today, full of petty squabbles, wild accusations, and the kind of neighborhood drama that makes HOA meetings look tame. One reads, "The goat of Eresh has eaten my barley 6 times. If it happens again, I will cook the goat and leave its bones at the temple gate." You can't help but admire the spicy follow-through. But Nani didn't go anonymous. His complaint was signed, specific, deliberate. He didn't just want justice, he wanted it known. You sit on a stone bench shaped like a crouching bull, part art, part statement. You imagine what it would feel like to be Nani's messenger, sent to collect copper, insulted, empty-handed, returning across scorching dunes with nothing but a bruised ego and a flimsy excuse. And still, Nani didn't go to war. He didn't hire thugs. He wrote. That's the part that lingers. You lift your hand, tracing the imaginary strokes in the air. Wedge, angle, stop. It takes a long time to carve a sentence into wet clay. You have to mean it. You have to rehearse it in your head. Every mark is a choice. That's what gives the complaint its weight. Not just the words, but the labor behind them. Nani's message, preserved all these years, is so sharp you could almost hear it whispered in your ear. I have not accepted the copper you brought me. Simple, devastating. You can picture Ea-Nasir reading that line and blinking, twice. Maybe he laughed, maybe he panicked, maybe he did nothing at all. And yet, his silence didn't win. The clay did. A wind rolls through the temple court now, cool and dry. You shiver, not from the chill, but from the echo of power. These weren't kings or soldiers or prophets, just a buyer, a seller, and a slab of fired earth that lasted longer than any sword. You think about how many of your own complaints have vanished. Emails lost, rants deleted, conversations forgotten. But Nani? He got eternal. You rise from the bench and walk the long colonnade back toward the edge of the temple grounds. The stars seem lower now, heavier, like they're pressing down with the weight of every human who ever got a raw deal. You pass by a tall clay jar, cracked in one spot but still standing. On its rim, someone has etched a curse, barely visible. You squint to read it. May the liar sleep on thorns and dream of empty baskets. Not bad. Not bad at all. Maybe it's time we bring that one back. You step into the street again, leaving behind the holy ground where justice flickered in and out like a badly fed oil lamp. You're heading for the docks next, where Nanny's journey began, where all this copper came ashore. But not yet. First, one last glance at the temple gate, just in case someone or something is watching. You swear you hear a chuckle in the wind, or maybe it's just the ghost of a very smug scribe. The river greets you like a silver snake slinking through the city's belly. It's quiet now, gliding past the sleeping docks with just enough ripple to reflect the stars. You follow the water south, toward the edge of Ur, where boats once arrived heavy with goods, and heavier with expectations. This is where Nanny's copper was supposed to arrive, and it did, technically. Just not in the shape, size, or quality he paid for. You crouch near the stone embankment and run your hand along the cool surface. Generations of hands have done this. Merchants, sailors, guards, all of them watching crates being unloaded with equal parts hope and dread. Because at the end of every trade route, there's a moment of truth and 1,000 ways to be disappointed. Now for your firm historical footing. Ur was a major hub in Mesopotamia's complex trade network, particularly during the Old Babylonian period. Copper flowed in from Magan, modern-day Oman, and Dilmun, modern Bahrain, and it was crucial. Copper made tools, weapons, temple fittings. It was so important that controlling its flow was a power move, both politically and economically. Which brings us back to our favorite merchant, Ea Nasir. He didn't just sell copper, he controlled access to it, or tried to. His network would have included sailors, caravan leaders, and scribes. It wasn't a one-man operation, even if he was the unlucky face of the worst Yelp review in history. And it's here, at the river's edge, that the system shows its cracks. Picture it, a tired sailor finally hauling a batch of ingots onto a dock just before dawn. They're not gleaming. They're rough, inconsistent. One has a visible crack, but the merchant paid months ago. What do? Turn back? Reforge them with fairy dust? You drop the crates. Say, good luck, and sail off. That's probably how Nanny's rep ended up on the receiving end of bad copper. Not just because Ea Nasir was shady, but because the system allowed shady. There were few refunds in the Bronze Age. No better business bureau. Just shame, shouting, or possibly divine wrath. And now for your fringe fact of the night. Some merchants marked their copper shipments with small seals, tiny cylinder stamps rolled over wet clay tags tied to the bundles. These seals included logos, signatures, and sometimes even threats. One fragment reads, "Property of Ningal under protection of Nana. Tamper and you will not walk." That's ancient for "do not steal" or "I call the gods." Historians still argue whether such seals were legally binding or just decorative intimidation. But here's the twist. They were also kind of collectible, like Mesopotamian Funko Pops. Some nobles kept broken seal pieces in their homes, possibly as trophies from successful deals or failed ones. You stand now at the exact spot where Nanny's hopes were likely dashed, where a messenger cracked open a crate, expecting smooth, weighty ingots, and instead found pitted, brittle junk. Imagine the heat rising in his face. Imagine him staring at the dock worker, mouth opening and closing like a beached fish. This question mark. This is what we waited 3 months for? Somewhere nearby, a kid probably laughed. A goat bleated. The wind refused to care. It's easy to romanticize ancient trade. Camel caravans, noble bargains, twinkling coin purses. But this was a hard, sweaty business. Long delays, fading records, and a constant risk that the person on the other end just didn't feel like holding up their end of the deal. Still, Nanny didn't burn the docks, didn't file a curse at the temple. Well, not immediately. He went home, sat down, and wrote. That's what keeps coming back. He could have screamed, but instead, he chose clay. You step into a warehouse ruin nearby. Its roof is long gone, but the layout still whispers. Rows of storage bins, some with dividers, a place for sorting, maybe even a clerk's desk in the corner. You spot some broken reeds and ink flakes in a jar. Ancient office supplies, basically. This is where it all met. Goods, scribes, and drama. Somewhere between the crate and the customer, things fell apart. And that little moment, between expectation and disappointment, is where human history quietly changed. Because when Nani filed his complaint, he turned a personal frustration into a public record. He didn't just want his money back, he wanted everyone to know. You lean against a cracked column, watching the moon ripple across the water. And here's something else. Ea-Nasir wasn't unusual. In fact, we know his name because he was written about. There are thousands of Mesopotamian tablets lost to time, most never found, others too shattered to read. But Nanny's survived. That complaint was baked hard in the fire of bureaucratic bitterness, a passive-aggressive masterpiece. And whether Ea-Nasir deserved it or not, well, that's up for debate. Some modern scholars argue that maybe Nani was difficult. Maybe the copper wasn't that bad. Maybe the whole thing was overblown. But that doesn't really matter, does it? Because Nani believed it mattered. And in believing, he preserved something deeply human. The eternal ache of being let down, and the drive to put that ache into words. You move again, back toward the road. The wind from the river follows, trailing fingers along your back like a farewell. It carries a scent of old metal and dried fish, faint, but real, just like the copper, just like the complaint, and just like every poor soul who's ever unwrapped a delivery and whispered, "What is this garbage?" The dock fades behind you now, but its message lingers. People haven't changed that much. We still buy. We still hope. We still write reviews. We just don't use clay anymore. The night thickens as you leave the river behind. The cobblestones feel warmer underfoot, still holding on to the heat of the day. You're moving deeper into the city again, but this time with a new purpose, chasing the ripple effects. Because Nanny's little act of defiance didn't end at the docks, or even at the temple. It echoed. Slowly, stubbornly, it worked its way into something bigger. You find yourself weaving through the residential district now. Mud brick homes packed shoulder to shoulder, their walls whispering snatches of old conversations. Dogs bark somewhere in the distance. A baby cries. And in between it all, you can almost hear murmurs. Neighbors gossiping, traders grumbling, scribes chuckling as they pass a certain tablet around. Yes, that tablet. Because the word did get out. And here's your historical fact to anchor the walk. Mesopotamia had a robust system of education, centered around scribal schools called edubas. These schools trained boys, usually from wealthy families, in the art of reading, writing, and record keeping. Think of them as elite prep schools for future bureaucrats. And one of the exercises students loved most? Copying real letters, including complaint letters. Yep. Nanny's fury became homework. Imagine a classroom full of tween scribes in training, snickering as they carefully etched. You put ingots before my messenger that were not good. You walk past a crumbling aduba now. Its columns lean slightly to the left, like they're eavesdropping on your thoughts. Inside, faded wall inscriptions still cling to one another like classroom graffiti. Some say the nanny tablet became a kind of rite of passage, something every student copied at least once, partly to practice and partly because it was just so juicy. And here's your fringe tidbit. Clay tablets were often recycled, wet down, reshaped, rewritten. But certain ones were too good or too hilarious to erase. Scholars have found entire caches of greatest hits, reused not for their legal value, but for their entertainment factor. Nanny's complaint? High on the list, alongside breakup notes, dream journals, and the occasional recipe. So now, picture it. A bored student in 1700 BCE, hunched over his tablet, tongue sticking out as he presses his stylus into wet clay. He's not just learning grammar, he's absorbing attitude. And this is where things get quietly revolutionary. Because when a grievance becomes a story, when people share it, study it, laugh at it, it stops being just about justice. It becomes culture. Historians still argue whether scribes saw themselves as mere recorders or active shapers of society. Were they passive vessels or sly curators with a taste for drama? The evidence leans toward the latter. These were people who knew the power of a juicy detail, of a pointed phrase, of a bad deal gone gloriously public. You pause by an abandoned courtyard. Moonlight spills across a broken hearth. The scent of ashes, long gone, still lingers. You sit on a step and look up. Here's the thing. We remember kings and battles and conquests, but most of ancient history, real, relatable human history, is made of small moments like this. Someone got cheated, someone wrote it down, someone else laughed, and then they all kept the tablet. You can almost see the chain reaction forming. First, Nanny's scribe, then his neighbors, then the temple clerks, the students, the teachers, maybe even a visiting merchant or two who borrowed a copy, chuckled darkly, and used it as a cautionary tale. Oh, you're trading with Ea Nasir. Be careful. Heard he sent garbage to Nanny. It's like the Bronze Age version of a viral tweet, carved in clay, shared for centuries. You hear something behind you, soft footsteps. You turn, but no one's there. Just the hush of the city winding down, and maybe your imagination pulling tricks. You've been walking with ghosts, after all. But you don't mind. They've been surprisingly chatty. You rise again, stretching slightly. The ache in your legs is familiar now. You've walked through homes and temples and trade routes, but what sticks with you most is that school. That image of a kid pressing his stylus into clay, copying Nanny's rage like it's sacred scripture. Because in a way, it was. It told the truth. And Mesopotamians loved truth, especially the inconvenient kind. You pass another wall. There's a faint mark near the base, barely visible. You crouch and brush your fingers over it. It's a crude drawing. A man holding a tablet, mouth wide open. Below it, the Sumerian sign for bad or unworthy. Maybe it was a warning. Maybe it was fan art. Either way, it's a sign. You're getting close. Ahead, the path narrows. The buildings press in. But you're not claustrophobic. You feel focused. Because the next place you're heading is where all of this comes together. The archive. The final resting place of Nanny's tablet. And hundreds like it. a room where anger is preserved, where paper cuts become papercraft, where customer service complaints become history. But you're not there yet. You're still walking through echoes, smiling at graffiti, wondering how many other voices, how many other nannies you've never heard from. Their tablets melted, their rage dissolved, their stories lost. And still, this one survived. Like a whisper, like a warning, like a wink. You step out of the alleyway, and there it is, the archive, low and square, like someone took a temple and pressed it flat. Its walls are thick, designed not for grandeur, but for endurance. Not a place of worship, but a vault for memory. And yet, walking toward it now, under the hush of a Mesopotamian moon, it feels just as sacred. You duck under the stone lintel, where a clay sign once read, House of Records, though the glyphs are now half chipped. Inside, the air turns cool and dry. It smells faintly of dust and something older, something like time itself, powdered into silence. You run your fingers along the rows of narrow cubbyholes carved into the walls. Each one held a tablet, thousands of them. A library without scrolls, a filing cabinet for the Bronze Age. This is where Nani's complaint came to rest. Not crumpled in anger, not laughed off, but kept. That's your historical fact for the night. Major cities like Ur, Nippur, and Lagash had central archives, sometimes connected to palaces, sometimes temples, where tablets were stored meticulously. Tax records, treaties, contracts, and yes, personal letters. They were dried, baked, and shelved like time capsules, organized by content or sender. Imagine the DMV and the Library of Congress sharing a mud brick bunker, and tucked in here, somewhere near the back, Nani's message to Ea Nasir. You pause in front of an open shelf. There's an empty space near the bottom, dust ringed like a ghost of what once sat there. That's where his tablet would have lived, until modern archaeologists pulled it free, squinted at the cuneiform, and realized with growing disbelief. Oh, wow. This is so passive-aggressive. The full letter is short, but it punches hard. You have treated me with contempt, Nani writes. You did not do what you promised. And then the kicker. I shall not accept hereafter any copper from you that is not of fine quality. Oof. That's not just a complaint. That's a customer embargo. And here's your fringe tidbit of the evening. The Nani tablet was discovered in the ruins of Ea Nasir's own home. Let that sink in. Nani sent a message so iconic, so spicy, so perfectly infuriating, Ea Nasir kept it. Or maybe just never got around to tossing it. Maybe he meant to respond. Maybe he reread it sometimes, muttering, "Oh, come on." Historians still argue whether he was hoarding it out of spite or shame. You pick up a nearby replica. It's heavy in the hand, etched with deliberate strokes. Not just language, emotion fossilized in clay. And the scribes who shelved it, they knew. They saw the flair behind the formality. They weren't just sorting records. They were witnessing the dawn of something new. A paper trail of accountability. Because once something is in the archive, it doesn't just belong to you. It belongs to everyone. Future traders, future scribes, future civilizations trying to understand how people treated one another. And for the first time, here was proof that you could complain, that even a well-connected copper dealer could be called out. That truth, even petty truth, could last longer than stone. You drift deeper into the archive. The shelves grow tighter, the tablets smaller. Some are practice pieces, clearly written by students. But you spot a few where the handwriting shifts, bolder, messier, angrier. Other complaints. Yes, Nanny wasn't alone. One letter scolds a baker for shorting an order. Another accuses a brewer of watering down beer. One particularly steamed customer threatens to bring a dispute to the temple judges unless the goat is returned in equal health or replaced. Goat litigation. Bronze Age chaos. And these weren't just idle grumbles. Many complaints were addressed directly to judges or temple officials, which means they weren't just being angry, they were filing for recourse. Ancient Mesopotamia had a functioning legal system, and writing your grievance wasn't just cathartic, it was procedural. But here's the twist. There's no reply tablet from Ea-Nasir. If he wrote back, it didn't survive. Maybe he was too embarrassed. Maybe he didn't think Nanny was worth the clay. Or maybe, just maybe, he kept getting these letters and realized he might be the problem. Historians still argue whether he was a true scammer or just caught in a bad supply chain. Maybe the copper really did show up flawed. Maybe his middleman failed him. Maybe the warehouse was cursed and everyone was too polite to say so. But in the end, that's the beauty of it. We don't know. We just have the complaint, not the rebuttal. One side frozen in time, a lopsided justice. But oh, what a side it is. You find a bench tucked in a shadowed corner and sit. The stone is cool. The walls lean in like they're listening. And you start to wonder, how many of our own frustrations, our bad restaurant reviews, our angry emails, our one-star product rants, will survive 4,000 years? Will someone, somewhere, read them and laugh? Or nod? Or whisper, same? Because that's the secret buried in this archive. Not just information, but connection. You and Nanny, centuries apart, still rolling your eyes at people who should have known better. The tablet glows faintly in the lamplight. You smile. People don't change, but they do write it down. You linger in the quiet of the archive, fingers still tingling from the texture of that clay replica. It's tempting to think the story ends here, in a dusty room, surrounded by records, with Nanny's voice immortalized in baked mud. But no, this is Mesopotamia. The echoes don't stop at the shelf, because now you're stepping into the ripple zone. You head out, back into the cool night. The streets of Ur hushed beneath stars. The lanterns are lower, the air a little softer, as if the city itself is winding down. But your mind? It's still racing. Because what Nanny started wasn't just a rant, it was a seed. And seeds, if left undisturbed, have a sneaky habit of growing. You're about to see how his complaint helped stir something larger, a cultural shift in how Mesopotamians viewed contracts, fairness, and public accountability. It wasn't overnight, and it definitely wasn't perfect. But that clay tablet was part of a slow brewing idea that people, not just kings or gods, deserved justice. Here's your historical fact. By 1750 BCE, Hammurabi, king of Babylon, had etched out one of the earliest and most comprehensive legal codes in history. The Code of Hammurabi didn't just deal with murder or theft. It had clauses about trade disputes, debt, defective goods, even accusations without evidence. Stuff that would have made Nanny nod furiously. The laws were posted publicly for all literate citizens to see. They were written in stone, literally, on tall steles for the community to read. And sure, you needed to be educated, and maybe a little tall, to read them. But the message was clear. There were rules. There was a system. And people like Nanny helped prove the need for it. As you stroll past another shadowed doorway, you hear voices. A pair of young scribes trading jokes as they pass a jug of beer. One of them says something about the copper man, and they both cackle. Nanny's legacy, still part of the local memes. Here's your fringe tidbit. In one archived tablet, a scribe writes mockingly in a format that mirrors Nanny's complaint, but about food. I ordered fattened sheep. You sent me skeletons. Scholars suspect it was satire, a playful jab among scribes that mimicked the now famous tone. Essentially, the first recorded customer service parody. It's weirdly comforting. Even in ancient Mesopotamia, people didn't just write about problems, they joked about them. But beneath the laughter, something deeper was happening. The more complaints like Nanny's that appeared, and yes, there were many, the more scribes began to systematize. Temple officials began issuing receipts. Merchants carried seals to certify agreements. Even messengers were trained to relay not just words, but intent. The messy chaos of early trade was slowly being organized into something resembling accountability. Historians still argue whether this standardization was grassroots or top-down. Did kings impose it from above, or did merchants and scribes push from below? Maybe both. But one thing's clear. When citizens began putting their frustrations in writing, society had to listen. You turn into another corridor, this one lined with statues of seated scribes. Their features are worn, their styluses long gone, but they exude a strange pride, as if saying, "We mattered," and they did. Because for every king who claimed divine right, there were 100 scribes translating that claim into law. For every corrupt merchant, there was a clay record of his misdeeds. And for every nanny, there was a chance, however slim, that writing it down could change something. And that's the power of the archive. It doesn't just keep complaints, it keeps pressure, evidence, memory. You approach a stone basin, an old hand-washing site. Back in the day, scribes would cleanse before handling sacred texts. You dip your fingers in the cool water, more out of respect than ritual. Around you, carved into the wall, are fragments of cuneiform. You recognize a few words: copper, weight, promise, anger. It feels like Nanny is still speaking, even here. Maybe that's why his tablet survived. Not because he was unique, but because he was common. Just angry enough, just literate enough, just bold enough to write it down and make sure someone saw. You start walking again, footsteps lighter now. This part of the city is older, more layered. You see foundations built on foundations, doorways sealed with brick, alleys that lead to stairs that lead to nowhere. The bones of the city are showing. And that's kind of perfect. Because what Nanny built wasn't flashy. It wasn't even intentional. But it left bones, structure, proof that regular people could speak up, and sometimes, even in the most bureaucratic of empires, they'd be heard. You pass another doorway where a merchant once weighed copper. Maybe Eanasir stood here once, arms crossed, trying to talk his way out of another mess. Maybe Nanny stood nearby, arms also crossed, refusing to budge. You smile. Wouldn't you love to see the look on Eanasir's face if he knew his shady business practices were still being dissected 4,000 years later? He probably thought he could bluff his way out. That one unhappy customer wouldn't matter. But he mattered. And he wrote it down. You're deeper in the city now, walking a path few take, past the main ziggurat, beyond the walls of temple and trade. Here, at the city's edge, time starts to thin. The clay gets brittle, the houses lean like they're tired of standing. And yet, scattered in this forgotten corner of Ur, lie the final clues to Nanny's unexpected legacy. You duck beneath a low archway into what looks like an old scribal school. The benches are small, the walls etched with faded exercises, vertical wedges, horizontal strokes, half-formed glyphs that once drove teenage scribes to the brink of meltdown. You can almost hear the muttered curses. Why does copper have so many strokes? This was where future scribes learned their craft. They didn't just memorize signs. They practiced writing letters, legal documents, contracts, and yes, complaints. In fact, tucked away in one cracked tablet, buried under a pile of syntax drills, you find a practice complaint written by a student who clearly had a flair for drama. The bread you sent was burnt like the desert sun. Do not send such shame again. Dramatic? Yes. Original? Not quite. The structure is suspiciously nanny-esque. And there's your historical fact. Scribal schools in Mesopotamia often used real documents as templates. Complaints like nannies weren't just recorded, they were taught. Students copied them to learn proper form, tone, and phrasing. So Nanny's letter? It became a model. The earliest known how to write a strongly worded message tutorial, which means somewhere, centuries later, another scribe, maybe with a bit of ink on his tunic and a chip on his shoulder, was told, "Today, we're copying the copper complaint. Again." So Nanny lives on. But it's not just scribes who were watching. The idea that ordinary people could speak back, could push against unfairness with words, was quietly seeping outward. Merchants began to offer written guarantees. Delivery records became more detailed. Temples started storing witness tablets in disputes. Not just the ruling, but the original accusation. The system wasn't perfect. And let's be real, half the city was still bartering sheep for shoes. But the gears of accountability had begun turning. Here's your fringe tidbit. Archaeologists uncovered a tablet in a town called Sippar, in which a woman named Adra accuses a trader of cheating her out of dye. What's wild? She cites a previous case, Nanny's complaint, as a precedent. The cuneiform is clear, as was seen in the case of the copper delivery. Which means, yes, Nanny had become case law. Your brain does a little cartwheel. This man, this frustrated copper customer, unknowingly became a legal benchmark, a standard. Not just a name in the mud, but a voice with weight. And here's where the real ripple begins. Because once a society accepts that writing can challenge power, even in small, petty ways, it plants the seed for much bigger things. Contracts, protests, reform, revolutions. Okay, Mesopotamia didn't have revolutions as we think of them, but it had unrest. It had citizens arguing temple taxes were too high. It had farmers writing to governors to say, "Hey, the canal broke and now we can't grow barley. Help." These weren't just shouts in the dark. They were formal, filed, acknowledged. And they had roots in moments like Nanny's. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian complaint culture had any real legal bite, or if it was just people venting into clay. But even venting has value. It creates a record, and records can't be ignored forever. You step into a chamber behind the scribal school, a storage room for discarded tablets. Broken ones, half-finished lessons, notes too sloppy to keep. It smells like dry earth and chalk. Near the back, you find a tablet snapped in two. The top half's missing, but the bottom? Oh, it's angry. You can tell by the heavy gouges in the script. Someone carved these words like they were etching a grudge into eternity. And if you send me one more stone marked as silver, I will report it to the temple judge. Do not test me. Whoever this was, they weren't messing around. You grin, running a thumb across the ancient punctuation. If you squint, you can almost see the generations of complaint that followed Nanny, each bolder than the last, each learning that words have power, not divine, not magical, but legal, social, emotional, because when you write something down, it's no longer just your burden. It becomes part of the world, shared, seen, remembered, even if it's just about copper. As you head back out into the moonlit street, a breeze catches the dust in a swirl. The ziggurat glows faintly in the distance. Somewhere in this city, a temple scribe is probably drafting a letter. Somewhere else, a merchant is swearing at a chipped amphora. And somewhere, long ago and yet somehow right now, Nanny is still fuming, still waiting, still reminding you that it's okay to speak up, even if your voice is just a scratch in the clay. Because someone might read it one day, and maybe, just maybe, they'll understand. You move slowly now, like your sandals have picked up the weight of 4,000 years. The night in Ur has deepened, thickened, wrapped itself in stillness. Even the distant temple drums have quieted, as if the gods themselves have nodded off, but not you. You follow a narrow alley that hugs the back edge of the merchant quarter, and though it's crumbling now, walls slouched, shutters missing, you can still imagine it bustling. The calls of traders, the shuffle of carts, the staccato clack of styluses on wet clay. Life was always loud here, even when it was angry, and now you're tracing that anger to its final resting place, not in fury, but in influence, because you've come to the legacy. Yes, Nanny's tablet is a curio in museum glass now, but its real imprint is in something bigger, a culture of accountability. Not in some romanticized golden way. Mesopotamia was still deeply hierarchical, riddled with corruption, superstition, and class divides. But the idea had taken root. The radical little idea that even a small-time buyer of copper could file a grievance, and that the world, or at least someone in it, might listen. You pause in front of a half-collapsed warehouse. Its bricks are thick with salt, the wood above eaten by centuries. But squint hard enough, and you can imagine it. Stacks of copper ingots in rough wooden bins, a grumbling merchant counting coins by oil lamp, and a delivery boy wiping sweat from his brow with a prayer that the weight was right this time. It's easy to picture Nanny standing here, arms crossed, jaw set like a man with nothing left to lose but his last nerve. And somehow, this guy, annoyed, ripped off, stubborn, sparked the oldest known complaint we've ever found. And through it, a form of resistance, not with pitchforks or riots, but with language, with syntax, with tone.